Where is Jamal Carter? The question echoed across the school courtyard so sharply that even the varsity basketball stopped bouncing. 3 black SUVs rolled through the front gates of Roosevelt High just after first period, their glossy paint reflecting the cold gray sky like moving mirrors. Students near the entrance froze mid-step. A few teachers standing outside the administration building exchanged nervous glances. The vehicles moved slowly across the pavement, tires whispering over rain-soaked concrete before stopping directly in front of the main office. The engines stayed running. Jamal Carter looked up from the second-floor hallway window and immediately felt his stomach tighten. Something about the scene felt wrong. Too quiet. Too official. 2 men stepped out of the first SUV wearing dark suits and long black coats despite the humid Georgia morning. One carried a leather folder tucked beneath his arm. The other scanned the courtyard with calm, unreadable eyes. Down below, whispers spread through the students like sparks through dry grass. Yo, somebody's getting arrested. Ain't that the FBI? Nah, man. Secret Service or something. Jamal slowly lowered the carton of milk in his hand. Around him, dozens of students pressed against the windows for a better look. Tyler Briggs leaned against a locker nearby, a smirk already forming across his face. Guess they finally caught somebody, he muttered loud enough for everyone around him to hear. A few kids laughed under their breath. Jamal turned away from the window and adjusted the strap of his worn backpack over one shoulder. The fabric near the zipper had started fraying weeks ago, but he kept sewing it back together instead of buying a new one. His mother kept telling him they'd replace it eventually when things got better. Eventually had become her favorite word lately. Outside, rainwater still dripped from the oak trees lining the parking lot after the storm that swept through Atlanta the night before. Jamal could still feel traces of that rain in his bones. He hadn't slept much after what happened. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw headlights cutting through the downpour, the sound of tires skidding, and the woman's trembling voice beneath the bus stop shelter. You didn't have to stay, she had whispered to him sometime around midnight. Jamal remembered shrugging as he handed her the last half of his sandwich wrapped in a napkin. Yeah, he'd replied quietly. But leaving didn't feel right either. He hadn't known her name. Didn't ask for money. Didn't even tell her his. He'd just stayed beside a bleeding stranger while dozens of cars rushed past through the storm like she was invisible. Jamal blinked hard and looked back down through the hallway window. One of the suited men had entered the building now. The other remained beside the SUVs, standing perfectly still in the drizzle. Principal Dawson suddenly appeared at the far end of the hallway, walking faster than usual, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the tile floor. His expression looked tense. Jamal Carter, he called firmly. The hallway went silent. Every head turned. Jamal felt heat crawl up the back of his neck. Tyler folded his arms slowly, enjoying every second. Knew it, he whispered. Principal Dawson stopped a few feet away from Jamal, adjusting his tie before speaking again. You need to come with me. Right now. The hallway stayed frozen. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled low across the clouds while the black SUVs waited below like they had come for someone important. Jamal followed Principal Dawson down the hallway while hundreds of eyes stayed locked on his back. The sound of whispers trailed behind him like smoke. Some students leaned halfway out of classrooms pretending not to stare. Others pulled out phones low against their hoodies, recording quietly. Jamal kept his head down and focused on the dull reflection of fluorescent lights sliding across the polished floor beneath his sneakers. Principal Dawson did not speak at first. His jaw stayed tight, shoulders stiff beneath his navy blazer. As they turned the corner toward the administration wing, Jamal noticed the school secretary standing near the office door with both hands pressed nervously around a paper coffee cup. Even she avoided looking directly at him. Do you know what this is about? Jamal finally asked. His voice calm but careful. Dawson exhaled slowly through his nose before answering. I was hoping you could tell me that. Jamal frowned slightly. I did not do anything. The principal stopped walking for half a second, then resumed. Those men asked specifically for you. Outside the front office windows, the black SUVs remained parked along the curb with engines humming softly beneath the rain. Their headlights glowed pale against the wet pavement. One student near the entrance tried stepping closer for a better look before a teacher quietly pulled him back. Jamal swallowed hard. His palms felt damp now. He had spent most of his life learning how quickly people assumed the worst about boys who looked like him. One misunderstanding. One rumor. One wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes that was enough. As they approached the office, Tyler Briggs suddenly appeared near the trophy case with two football players beside him. Yo, Carter, Tyler called out casually. If you are running from the law, at least do it after chemistry class. His friends laughed under their breath. Jamal kept walking. Dawson shot Tyler a sharp look but said nothing. The office doors opened with a soft buzz. Warm air rolled over Jamal's face, carrying the smell of coffee and old paper. Inside, two men in dark suits stood beside the receptionist desk. One was tall and broad-shouldered with silver streaks along his temples. The other looked younger, maybe early 30s, clean-cut and quiet. Both turned the moment Jamal entered. The older man studied him carefully, not with anger, but with focus. Like he had been searching for a face all morning and had finally found it. Jamal shifted slightly beneath the attention. That is him, Principal Dawson said. The younger man nodded once and reached into his coat pocket. Jamal's heartbeat jumped. But instead of handcuffs or a badge, the man carefully removed a folded piece of cloth sealed inside a clear plastic evidence bag. Jamal stared at it. A dark gray hoodie sleeve. His hoodie sleeve. The rip near the wrist made his chest tighten instantly. Rain flashed through his memory again. Cold wind. Blinding headlights. The woman sitting beneath the bus stop shelter while blood stained the cuff of his sweatshirt. You left this with her last night, the older man said quietly. Jamal blinked. Is she okay? The two men exchanged a brief glance. Something in the room shifted. Principal Dawson looked confused now. The older man finally gave a small nod. Because of you, he said, she is alive. Silence settled over the office so suddenly that even the ticking wall clock sounded loud. Jamal stared at the plastic bag in the man's hand while rain tapped softly against the front windows. For the first time since those SUVs arrived, the fear in his chest loosened slightly. But outside, beyond the glass doors, students still crowded the sidewalks watching the office like something enormous was about to happen. Principal Dawson looked between Jamal and the two men like he had suddenly walked into the middle of a conversation written in another language. The older man carefully lowered the plastic evidence bag onto the receptionist desk while rainwater slid down the front office windows in long silver streaks. Outside, students still crowded the courtyard beneath the covered walkways, trying to catch glimpses through the glass. Jamal could feel their curiosity pressing against the building like heat. Last night around 9:30, the younger man said calmly, Miss Evelyn Whitmore was involved in a vehicle accident less than 3 miles from here. Jamal's eyes widened slightly at the name. Even he recognized it. Everybody in Georgia knew Evelyn Whitmore. Billionaire investor. Founder of the Whitmore Foundation. One of the most powerful businesswomen in the Southeast. Her name was stamped across hospitals, scholarships, youth centers, and half the news channels in Atlanta. Jamal stared at the man in disbelief. That was her? The older man nodded once. Her driver lost control during the storm. Miss Whitmore suffered minor injuries and shock. According to emergency responders, you stayed with her for nearly 40 minutes before help arrived. Jamal looked down at the floor awkwardly. I just waited with her. Principal Dawson blinked hard. You mean to tell me, he stopped himself mid-sentence, suddenly aware that His voice had changed completely. Softer now. More careful. Jamal noticed it immediately. People always changed their tone once someone important entered the story. The younger man opened the leather folder and slid several papers across the desk. Miss Whitmore specifically requested to meet Jamal Carter this morning before she returns to Atlanta. The receptionist nearly dropped her coffee cup. Principal Dawson straightened his tie again, his face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. Well, he said quickly, forcing a nervous smile, Jamal is one of our students here at Roosevelt. Very respectful young man. Very responsible. Jamal slowly lifted his eyes toward him. Just yesterday Dawson had accused him of skipping detention because the city bus ran late. Jamal said nothing. The office grew uncomfortably quiet for a second. Outside, thunder rumbled softly again somewhere beyond the clouds. Then another sound drifted through the building. Helicopter blades. Faint at first. Growing louder. Everyone in the office turned toward the windows instinctively. A news helicopter appeared above the football field, circling low through the gray morning sky. Students in the courtyard erupted into noise, pointing phones upward. Oh my God, the receptionist whispered. The media found out. The younger man checked his watch. They usually do. Jamal's chest tightened again. Everything suddenly felt too big. Too fast. Just 12 hours earlier he had been sitting beneath a leaking bus shelter holding pressure against a stranger's injured arm with his ripped hoodie sleeve while rainwater soaked through his sneakers. Now helicopters circled his school. Principal Dawson cleared his throat awkwardly. Jamal, he said carefully, perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere more private. Before Jamal could answer, the front office doors burst open. Tyler Briggs stumbled halfway inside with two other students behind him before freezing at the sight of the suited men. Sorry, Tyler muttered quickly, though his eyes stayed glued to the SUVs outside. He looked at Jamal, confused now instead of smug. What is going on? The older man turned slowly toward Tyler. School should still be in session, son. Tyler immediately backed toward the hallway. Jamal caught the brief look on his face before he disappeared again. Not confidence anymore. Uncertainty. Fear maybe. For the first time all morning, Jamal realized something strange. Nobody in that building was looking down on him anymore. The invisible kid from apartment 4C suddenly had the attention of everyone. The conference room beside the main office had never felt smaller. Jamal sat quietly at the far end of the polished table while rain continued tapping against the windows overlooking the football field. Principal Dawson paced near the coffee machine pretending to organize papers, but his nervous movements gave him away. Every few seconds he glanced toward the suited men like he was trying to calculate how important this situation really was. Outside the glass walls, students still crowded the hallway pretending to pass between classes while secretly watching everything unfold. Jamal could see phones lifted chest-high recording blurry videos through the windows. Roosevelt High had not felt this alive in years. The younger man closed the leather folder carefully. Miss Whitmore's medical team insisted she rest this morning, he explained. But she refused to leave until she personally thanked the young man who stayed with her during the storm. Jamal shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I really did not do much. The older man looked directly at him. Most people kept driving. Those words landed heavily in the room. Jamal looked down at his hands. The faint stain of dried rainwater still darkened the cuff of his hoodie from the night before. He remembered every detail now with painful clarity. The sharp smell of wet asphalt. Wind pushing freezing rain sideways beneath the bus shelter roof. The woman sitting against the bench shaking from cold while traffic lights reflected red and yellow across the flooded street. He remembered how exhausted she looked. Not rich. Not powerful. Just tired and hurt and alone. You gave her your sweatshirt, the younger man said. Jamal shrugged softly. She was freezing. Principal Dawson stopped pacing. "Jamal," he said slowly, "why did you not call someone sooner?" Jamal blinked once. "I did." Silence followed. Dawson's expression tightened. Jamal continued quietly. Nobody came for almost 20 minutes. Cars slowed down, looked at us, then drove away. The room grew still again. Even the older man lowered his eyes briefly. Jamal leaned back in his chair, his voice calm but honest now. "At first she thought I was trying to rob her." Principal Dawson looked startled. "What?" Jamal nodded faintly. "She apologized after." The younger man exchanged another glance with his partner. "Miss Whitmore told us that part too." Outside the conference room, Tyler Briggs appeared again near the hallway water fountain. This time he was not laughing. He stood watching silently with several other students beside him while teachers tried unsuccessfully to move everyone toward class. The tension in the building had changed completely. Nobody knew exactly what was happening anymore, but everybody understood it mattered. Then the conference room door opened quietly. The school secretary stepped inside clutching a cordless phone. "Principal Dawson," she whispered nervously, "Channel 8 News is on line 1 asking for a statement." Dawson nearly choked on his own breath. "A statement?" "And Channel 5, she added quickly. "And the Atlanta Journal." The principal rubbed both hands across his face. Jamal watched him carefully. Yesterday Dawson barely remembered his name unless attendance sheets forced him to. Now reporters were calling because of him. It felt strange. Unreal. The older man finally stood from the table and buttoned his coat. "Miss Whitmore's vehicle is 10 minutes away." Jamal's chest tightened instantly. "She is coming here?" "Yes." The younger man smiled faintly for the first time all morning. She insisted. Outside, another black SUV slowly rolled through the front gate as students pressed closer against classroom windows. Rain drifted softly through the gray air while helicopter blades echoed overhead again. Jamal sat motionless at the table, hearing his own heartbeat now. Somewhere deep inside him, beneath the nerves and confusion and noise, another feeling slowly surfaced. Not pride. Not excitement. Something quieter. For the first time in a very long while, Jamal Carter no longer felt invisible. The sound of tires rolling across wet pavement pulled every eye in Roosevelt High toward the front entrance. Another black SUV eased into the circular driveway beneath the flagpole while rain drifted softly through the cold morning air. Inside the conference room, nobody spoke. Principal Dawson stood perfectly still beside the coffee machine, one hand frozen around a paper cup he had forgotten to drink from. Jamal remained seated at the long table, shoulders tense beneath his faded hoodie. Through the glass walls he could see students gathering again near the front lobby despite teachers trying to push them back toward class. Nobody wanted to miss whatever was about to happen. The older security agent touched the small earpiece near his collar and nodded once. "She is here." Jamal felt his pulse quicken instantly. Outside, the rear passenger door of the SUV opened slowly. A woman stepped out beneath a large black umbrella held by another suited guard. Even from across the courtyard, Jamal recognized her immediately. Her dark wool coat moved gently in the wind as she crossed the wet pavement with calm, steady steps. The white bandage wrapped around her left hand stood out sharply against the gray morning. Students near the entrance began whispering louder now. "That is Evelyn Whitmore." "No way. Why is she here?" Phones rose everywhere. The news helicopter above the football field drifted lower through the clouds, its blades chopping through the air like distant thunder. Jamal swallowed hard. He still remembered her sitting beneath the leaking bus stop shelter the night before with rainwater soaking her hair and blood running down her wrist while traffic sprayed dirty water across the curb. She had looked exhausted then. Human. Nothing like the woman now walking toward the school entrance surrounded by security and cameras. Principal Dawson suddenly straightened his posture and rushed toward the lobby doors before anyone else could move. Jamal watched through the conference room glass as the principal greeted her with both hands extended and an eager smile stretched across his face. Dawson laughed nervously at something she said, nodding far too quickly. Jamal noticed the change immediately. Yesterday Dawson barely looked at students from Jamal's neighborhood and less disciplined reports crossed his desk. Now he practically bowed while leading Evelyn Whitmore through the hallway. The office staff moved aside instantly as she entered the administration wing. Teachers peeked from classroom doors. Students fell silent. The sound of her heels against the tile floor echoed softly through the building. Then she stopped outside the conference room. For one brief second, her eyes met Jamal's through the glass. Recognition flashed across her face instantly. Not polite recognition. Not corporate politeness. Something warmer. Something real. She opened the door herself before anyone else could. "There he is," she said softly. Jamal stood immediately, unsure what to do with his hands. Up close, she looked tired beneath her composure. Faint shadows rested beneath her eyes, and a thin scratch crossed the side of her forehead near her hairline. But her smile remained steady. "You stayed," she said quietly. Jamal gave a small shrug. "You needed help." The room went still again. Principal Dawson lingered awkwardly near the doorway while the security agents stepped back respectfully. Evelyn Whitmore walked closer until she stood directly in front of Jamal. Then, to everyone's surprise, she reached out and gently took both of his hands in hers. "No," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saw someone everyone else ignored." Silence spread through the conference room like a held breath. Even the helicopter outside seemed distant now. Jamal looked down briefly, uncomfortable beneath the attention. He had not helped her because she was rich. He had helped because she was cold and injured and alone in the rain. Evelyn seemed to understand that completely. She studied his worn backpack resting beside the chair, the frayed cuff of his hoodie, the exhaustion behind his eyes. Then she looked toward Principal Dawson. Her expression changed slightly. Sharper now. More observant. "Tell me something," she asked calmly. "Why does a young man this kind look so surprised that anyone came back for him?" The question hung in the conference room so heavily that nobody answered at first. Rain drifted against the windows in soft streaks while the helicopter continued circling somewhere above the football field. Principal Dawson shifted his weight awkwardly beside the door, suddenly unable to meet Evelyn Whitmore's eyes. Jamal slowly pulled his hands back, unsure what to say. He had spent years teaching himself not to expect much from people. It was easier that way. Easier than disappointment. Easier than hoping someone would notice when they usually did not. Evelyn studied him carefully for another moment before glancing toward the chair beside the conference table. "May I sit?" she asked softly. Jamal nodded immediately. The billionaire lowered herself into the chair slowly, one hand resting near the white bandage wrapped around her wrist. Up close, she looked less like the woman from magazine covers and business interviews and more like someone carrying a weight nobody else could see. The room stayed silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Then Evelyn looked back at Jamal. "Last night," she said quietly, "when you found me under that bus shelter, I thought you were going to walk past like everyone else." Jamal frowned faintly. "Why?" A sad smile crossed her face. "Because people usually do." The answer caught him off guard. She glanced toward the rain outside the windows before continuing. "You would be surprised how invisible people become once others think they are already taken care of." Jamal lowered his eyes toward the table. He understood that feeling more than she probably realized. The older security agent quietly stepped toward the door, giving them space while Principal Dawson remained frozen near the corner of the room. Nobody interrupted. Evelyn folded her hands carefully together. "Do you know what I remember most from last night?" Jamal shook his head. Not the accident, she said. Not the rain. Not even the pain. Her voice softened further. I remember you sitting beside me on that cold bench after you gave me your sweatshirt. Jamal looked uncomfortable now. It was just a hoodie. No, Evelyn replied gently. It was kindness from someone who clearly could not afford to lose it. The words settled deep in the room. Jamal stared down at the frayed sleeve resting against his wrist. He remembered the cold immediately after giving it to her. The freezing wind soaking through his thin t-shirt while traffic lights flickered across puddles at the curb. But he also remembered the relief in her eyes once she stopped shaking so hard. Outside the conference room, the hallway had grown quieter now. Even the students pressing against the glass seemed to sense something emotional was happening inside. Tyler Briggs stood farther back this time, arms folded tightly across his chest, no longer smiling. Evelyn reached into her coat pocket and carefully removed something small wrapped in tissue paper. She placed it gently on the table between them. Jamal unfolded it slowly. His breath caught instantly. It was the silver cross necklace his late grandmother had given him before she passed away 3 years earlier. He had not even realized it slipped off during the storm. The paramedics found it tangled in my coat, Evelyn explained. I wanted to return it personally. Jamal held the necklace tightly in his palm while warmth rose unexpectedly behind his eyes. His grandmother used to tell him that kindness always came back eventually, even if it took years. Back then, he never fully believed her. Evelyn watched his expression carefully. She must have meant a great deal to you. Jamal nodded once, unable to speak for a second. She raised me while my mother worked nights. The billionaire smiled softly. Then she raised you well. Silence returned again, but this time it felt different. Warmer somehow. Softer. Beyond the rain-streaked windows and crowded hallways and flashing news cameras outside, something quiet had shifted between them. Not power. Not status. Recognition. Two people from completely different worlds sitting across from each other at the same table, connected by one small moment of humanity in the middle of a storm. The silence inside the conference room broke when another knock sounded at the door. Principal Dawson turned. Quickly, grateful for the interruption, but his expression tightened again the moment the assistant principal stepped inside holding a tablet with both hands. Sir, she whispered nervously, the reporters are asking if Miss Whitmore plans to make a public statement. Evelyn looked up calmly. I do. Principal Dawson blinked. Here? Yes, she answered simply. Outside the windows, the rain had finally begun to ease. Thin gray light spilled across the football field while students packed the hallways shoulder to shoulder despite repeated announcements ordering everyone back to class. Teachers had mostly given up trying to control the crowd. Roosevelt High had become the center of every conversation in the city within a single hour. Jamal remained seated quietly at the table while Evelyn rose slowly from her chair. The older security agent stepped closer. Miss Whitmore, we can arrange a press conference downtown instead. She shook her head. No. People should hear this here. Her eyes drifted toward Jamal again. At his school. Those words landed heavily in the room. Principal Dawson straightened his posture immediately. Of course, he said quickly. We can prepare the auditorium right away. Evelyn studied him for a brief moment before nodding once. Good. 20 minutes later, nearly the entire student body filled Roosevelt High's auditorium. The air buzzed with nervous excitement beneath the glow of old stage lights. Rainwater still clung to jackets and backpacks while whispers rippled through the rows like static electricity. Tyler Briggs sat near the front now, unusually quiet, his football teammates beside him no longer joking around. Teachers lined the walls. News cameras waited near the back doors. Jamal stood just off stage beside the curtain, heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He hated attention. Always had. The younger security agent adjusted his tie beside him. "You doing okay, son?" Jamal nodded even though he was not sure. Across the stage, Principal Dawson walked to the podium first. His voice sounded overly polished now, stretched tight with nervous energy. "Today," he announced, "Roosevelt High has the honor of welcoming one of the nation's leading philanthropists." The applause started immediately as Evelyn Whitmore stepped onto the stage beneath the bright auditorium lights. Students lifted phones everywhere. Camera flashes flickered across the dark curtains. But Evelyn did not smile for the cameras. Instead, she walked slowly to the podium and rested both hands lightly against its edges. Then she looked directly toward the crowd of students. "Last night," she began quietly, "I learned something important about this city." The room fell completely silent. During one of the worst storms this year, dozens of cars passed me while I sat injured and alone beside the road. Jamal lowered his eyes slightly behind the curtain. He could feel hundreds of students listening now. Evelyn continued softly. "Some people slowed down long enough to stare. Others rolled up their windows and kept driving." Her voice sharpened slightly. "But one young man stayed." The giant projector screens beside the stage suddenly lit up with security camera footage from a nearby gas station. Grainy black and white images showed Jamal beneath the leaking bus shelter the night before, sitting beside Evelyn in the storm while cars rushed past through sheets of rain. Audible murmurs spread through the auditorium instantly. Tyler Briggs stared at the screen in disbelief. Jamal looked frozen in the footage, soaked to the bone, pressing his sweatshirt around Evelyn's injured wrist while traffic splashed water across the curb beside them. The image stayed on screen for several long seconds. Then Evelyn spoke again. "That young man is Jamal Carter." Every head in the auditorium turned at once. Jamal stood motionless near the curtain while whispers exploded across the room. Some students looked stunned. Others ashamed. Teachers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Tyler slowly lowered his eyes toward the floor. Evelyn's voice softened again. "He did not help me because of my name. In fact, he did not even know who I was." She paused briefly before adding, "He helped because kindness still lives in him despite a world that too often overlooks boys like him." The room stayed silent after that. Not forced silence. Heavy silence. The kind that makes people confront themselves. The silence inside the auditorium lasted several seconds after Evelyn Whitmore finished speaking. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Even the students holding phones seemed frozen beneath the pale glow of the stage lights. Jamal stood near the curtain with his hands tucked awkwardly into the pockets of his hoodie while hundreds of eyes remained fixed on him in a way he had never experienced before. Not with suspicion. Not with judgment. Something else. Something heavier. Evelyn stepped away from the podium slowly and looked toward him again. "Jamal," she said gently, her voice echoing softly through the auditorium speakers, "would you come up here for a moment?" A nervous ripple moved through the crowd as Jamal hesitated before finally stepping onto the stage. His worn sneakers crossed the polished wood floor quietly while camera flashes burst from the back of the room. He could feel every stare following him. Tyler Briggs lowered his head the moment Jamal passed the front row. Principal Dawson stood off to the side clutching a stack of papers against his chest, suddenly looking much smaller than usual. Jamal stopped beside Evelyn beneath the bright stage lights. Up close, he could see moisture gathering in the corners of her eyes. She turned toward the audience again. "This young man reminded me of something I was beginning to lose," she said softly. "The belief that compassion still matters more than status." The auditorium stayed silent enough to hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vents overhead. Evelyn reached toward one of her assistants standing near the curtains. The woman handed her a dark blue folder embossed with silver lettering. Evelyn opened it carefully before turning back toward Jamal. "This morning," she continued, the Whitmore Foundation voted unanimously to award Jamal Carter a full academic scholarship through any college or university he chooses after graduation. Gasps spread instantly across the auditorium. Teachers exchanged stunned looks. Several students began clapping before the sound quickly grew louder, filling the room in rolling waves. Jamal blinked in disbelief. "What?" he whispered under his breath. Evelyn smiled warmly now. "Tuition, housing, books, transportation. Everything." Jamal stared at the folder in her hands like he was afraid touching it might make the moment disappear. He thought about his mother working double shifts at Grady Memorial Hospital. The overdue electric bills stacked beside the microwave. The nights she skipped dinner pretending she was not hungry so he could eat more. For a second, he could not breathe properly. Evelyn gently placed the folder into his hands. "You earned this long before last night," she whispered quietly enough that only he could hear. The applause continued across the auditorium, but Jamal barely noticed it. His fingers trembled slightly against the smooth cover of the scholarship folder. Then Evelyn stepped back toward the microphone once more. "And one more thing," she added. The crowd slowly quieted again. Effective immediately, the Whitmore Foundation will also begin funding a new mentorship and scholarship program right here at Roosevelt High for underprivileged students. Another wave of stunned murmurs swept through the room. Principal Dawson nearly dropped the papers in his hands. "No student," Evelyn continued firmly, "should ever feel invisible because of where they come from." Her eyes drifted briefly toward Tyler Briggs and several other students sitting silently near the front rows before returning to Jamal. Tyler slowly looked down at his lap, shame written clearly across his face now. Jamal remained standing beside Evelyn, still trying to process everything happening around him. Just yesterday he had worried about whether the bus card in his wallet had enough money left for the ride home. Now an entire auditorium stood applauding him beneath bright stage lights while news cameras recorded every second. But the strangest part was not the scholarship or the applause or the reporters waiting outside. It was the feeling growing quietly inside his chest. For the first time in years, Jamal no longer felt like the world was waiting for him to fail. By the time the assembly ended, the rain had completely stopped. Soft afternoon light poured through the tall windows of Roosevelt High, washing the hallways in pale gold as students slowly spilled out of the auditorium in stunned silence. Nobody shoved past Jamal anymore. Nobody laughed under their breath when he walked by. Instead, students moved aside quietly as he stepped through the crowded hallway with the blue scholarship folder still held carefully against his chest. The paper felt heavier now, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. Near the lockers outside the science wing, Tyler Briggs finally stepped into his path. Jamal stopped automatically, expecting another joke, another smirk, another comment designed to cut deep enough for everyone nearby to laugh. But Tyler only stood there awkwardly with both hands shoved into the pockets of his varsity jacket. For the first time since Jamal had known him, Tyler looked nervous. "Hey," he muttered quietly. Jamal waited. Tyler glanced down at the floor tiles before speaking again. "What you did last night, that was real." The hallway around them stayed unusually quiet. Tyler rubbed the back of his neck uncomfortably. "I guess I never really knew you." Jamal studied him for a second, then gave a small shrug. "Most people did not try." Tyler nodded slowly, unable to argue with that. Then he stepped aside without another word. Jamal continued down the hallway while sunlight reflected softly across the polished lockers beside him. Outside the front entrance, news vans still lined the curb, but the chaos from earlier had faded into something calmer now. The helicopters were gone. The shouting reporters had mostly packed up their equipment. Only the black SUVs remained waiting quietly near the flagpole beneath the clearing sky. Jamal pushed through the front doors and stopped the moment he saw her. His mother stood near the curb in pale blue hospital scrubs beneath a thin cardigan, still wearing her employee badge from Grady Memorial. Her tired eyes looked red like she had rushed straight from work the second she heard the news. One of Evelyn Whitmore's assistants stood nearby speaking softly with her, but Miss Carter barely seemed to notice anyone else. The second she saw Jamal, her hand flew to her mouth. Jamal walked toward her slowly. Neither of them spoke at first. Then his mother wrapped both arms around him so tightly that the scholarship folder nearly slipped from his hands. Jamal closed his eyes as she held him there beside the line of black SUVs while cool wind drifted through the school parking lot. "I am so proud of you," she whispered shakily. Jamal swallowed hard. "Mom," but his voice caught before he could finish. Behind them, Evelyn Whitmore stood near the open SUV door watching quietly from a respectful distance. She said nothing. She did not need to. Some moments were too human for speeches. Jamal's mother finally pulled back slightly and touched the side of his face with trembling fingers. "Your grandmother used to say your heart would open doors no money ever could," she whispered. Jamal looked down at the silver cross necklace resting against his chest again. The late afternoon sun caught the small metal pendant, making it glow softly for a brief second. Around them, students lingered near the school entrance watching silently. Teachers stood near the sidewalks. Even Principal Dawson remained by the doors with his hands folded awkwardly in front of him, no longer looking like the most powerful man in the building. The wind moved gently through the oak trees lining the parking lot while puddles from the storm reflected pieces of blue sky between broken clouds. Jamal looked out across the school grounds one last time. Yesterday he had walked these same sidewalks feeling invisible. Today the world had finally stopped long enough to see him. Not because he became rich. Not because cameras showed up. But because on one cold, rainy night, a tired young man chose kindness when nobody was watching.